And if you are just hopping in, we'll begin momentarily. We'll just wait for more people to join us here in the webinar. If you're already here, great to be with you this afternoon. Thank you so much. All right, as more folks join in, we will go ahead and dive in. I'm Julia with Politics and Prose. We're live with Dr. Todd Kashdan and Carla Starr discussing the art of insubordination, how to dissent and defy effectively. We've put a link in the chat column to purchase a copy of the book directly from us at Politics and Prose. We do have some signed copies, thanks to the author for that. If you have questions during this discussion, use the Q&A feature found at the bottom of your screen. We'll move to your questions in the last portion of the discussion, though we apologize in advance if we run short on time to answer all of them. And if you'd like to enable a live transcript for the discussion, you can click the CC live transcript icon at the bottom of your screen to enable that. We do want to thank all of you out there for joining us. We're very thankful to our family of loyal customers who keep our business and spirits afloat. But I don't want to talk too long. I want to get to this great book. For too long, the term insubordination has evoked negative feelings and mental images. But for ideas to evolve and societies to progress, it's vital to cultivate rebels who are committed to challenging conventional wisdom and improving on it. Change never comes easily, and most would-be rebels lack the skills to overcome hostile audiences who cling desperately to the way things are. So this is a book that tackles all of that, filled with engaging stories about dissenters in the trenches and the science that will transform your thinking. The art of insubordination is for anyone seeking more justice, courage, and creativity in the world. Author Todd Kashdan is professor of psychology at George Mason University and a leading authority on well-being, curiosity, courage, and resilience. He's published more than 200 scientific articles, and his work has been cited in more than 35,000 times. And he received the American Psychological Association's Award for Distinguished Scientific Early Career Contributions to Psychology. His books, Curious and The Upside of Your Dark Side, which you can also get from us, have been translated into more than 15 languages. His writing has appeared in the Harvard Business Review, National Geographic, and other publications. His research is featured regular in media outlets such as the New York Times, the Atlantic, and Time. He's a twin and with twin daughters, plus one more, and plans to rapidly populate the world with great conversationalists. And Carla Starr, moderating this afternoon, is the co-author of Making Numbers Count, which I just learned I'll be reading next. The Art and Science of Communicating Numbers with Chip Heath. Her first book, Can You Learn to Be Lucky, was named a Fast Company Best Book of the Year, an award-winning contributor to many publications, including The Atlantic and Slate. She's currently a columnist for Medium and lives in Portland. On behalf of Politics and Prose, enough from me already. Please join me in welcoming author Todd Kashdan and Carla Starr. Thank you both so much. The screen is yours.
Thanks for that great intro.
Yes, thank you so much for having us. So here's Todd's amazing book. Everyone, if you don't have it, you definitely should buy it. I have devoured this book. And Todd, I just want to say one of the things I loved about this is it's the opposite of so many books written by academics. Sorry, I'm not going to name any names, but so many books I read written by academics, I feel like are kind of fluffed up articles. And this is legitimately a guidebook. Like there's no way anybody could summarize this in just a few pages. So I have to say kudos to that. There's just, and it's so well written and it's so funny. This is one of those books I'm going to be gifting this book already. I can tell.
I appreciate that from a fellow author whose amazing book has changed me to think about numbers, which means I'm not going to say any number throughout for the next 45 minutes because I'm scared to say it around you.
Don't be scared. Come on, be curious. Lean into it. Right? Practice deliberate humility.
You don't get the courage unless the fear is present. That's the one of the fundamental pieces of the book of the firefighter who has a complete physical intolerance to being burned and experiences no physical reaction. They can be an amazing firefighter, but they're not a courageous firefighter.
That's true. That is actually a really good point you have in here is courage is not the absence of fear. It is the ability to act despite fear.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wonderful. See, that's actually one of my little models up here. You can see, be brave. So it was very nice to see that. So one thing I'm curious about, can you just maybe tell us a little bit about the backstory about how you decided to write this book or how you came up with the idea?
Sure. So there's a personal origin story, and then there's the sociological story. I'll just give the personal one, and then we can futz around with it. Is I was if you skip to the acknowledgments at the end of the book, you'll learn that I grew up with my twin brother by a single mom whose husband walked out on her when I was 2. And so she raised twins by herself. And I grew up in a neighborhood that was pretty much 95% African American. And so with no male role model and a mom who made me a latchkey kid of the 80s, like 85% of other Americans at the time, I had no idea of how to make friends. I had no idea how to speak to other adults. I had no idea how to function in a Black cultural zeitgeist as a little white boy living around there who was little mama's boy. And for me, this was the book that I wish I had when I was a kid. For anyone that didn't have the proper amount of role models, the proper adults in their lives who were maybe neglectful or abusive, and for anyone that didn't have the privileges growing up, to me it was let me synthesize 60 years of science about how can you be influential, how can you make friends and coalitions so you can be more powerful, how can you obtain status not for the sake of power, but for the sake of you have strengths, you have fortitude, you have ideas, you have innovations, you see flaws and holes in people's thinking, and you want to be influential in trying to move society in a better direction. And you can't do that really effectively in society if people don't listen to your message and don't elaborate on your message, and you don't have these alliances where people are willing to support you. So this was my gift to my younger self, and then my gift to everyone else, so everyone else doesn't have to spend 6 years mired in a cave of academic papers to try to put this all together.
Well, I appreciate you from sparing us all of the 6 years in academic purgatory, let's say. So were there any things growing up that you, I guess in hindsight, that you wish you would have been able to be a subordinate for, or like any status quo bucking in your past that you maybe wish you could have a time machine and successfully, I don't know, upheave?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, if anything, it would be how do you subvert a culture where bullying is acceptable? If anyone who's listening who grew up in the 1980s knows that there was no anti-bullying initiative in schools in New York, much less if you lived in Oklahoma or Idaho. And so this was a dog-eat-dog world, and this is still the place for many neighborhoods throughout the world. And the question is, what is the best way to diffuse someone that wants to take your money, take your bicycle, or pull out one of your eyeballs in the midst of hand-to-hand combat as you're walking home from 3rd grade? And my twin brother and I have had many escapades of, I won't give all the gory details, but the best one was we were walking home from school on a random Tuesday at 3 p.m. and someone had climbed a telephone pole with their friend and decided to jump down on top of us, thinking this would be a great idea to steal our backpack. And I can tell you that your spinal cord, despite 2.5 million years of evolution, is not designed to take on an 85-year-old boy with condor-like hands trying to grab something to actually function well in the aftermath. So we laid there for quite some time, and it would have been nice to know what are ways for you to influence people so that they can see that you are socially attractive, that you have knowledge, that you have wisdom, that you have social value such that you are worth something more than just putty for people to showcase their physical strength and take out their aggression on.
That is, okay. That is such a good segue to my next question. Okay, so this is my vote for understated sentence of the book. It's on page 71. As a rebel, you must stay strong. Individual results vary, and race, sex, gender, and other visible personality features factor into how your expressions of principled insubordination are interpreted by others. So I thought of that, and I thought about how differently we interpret messages based on the characteristics of the messenger. And then I also did notice that some of the stories that you have in the book say, for example, Elizabeth Jennings, who was, kind of Rosa Parks' predecessor. She was able to like make some kind of headway, partly because she was represented by Chester Arthur, who went on to become president of the United States. Rosa Parks did have, MLK as her, at her side. And then you also have a story in here about Charles Darwin, and he was able to kind of come to prominence, or at least not get burned at the stake for advancing his theory of evolution, partly because I think he came from, not only did he come from a very prominent family, but he had a lot of powerful friends who were, able to advocate for him. So how much do you think that it is just sort of a necessary byproduct of society that even when you are a rebel, an outsider, you kind of need this input or this vote of confidence from an insider or somebody with some kind of privilege or social power?
I'm so glad you're going right into the radioactive terrain instantaneously. This is why I wanted you to be the moderator over many a person with a tweed jacket with the elbow pads. I wanted Carla for this reason. So, okay, there's a lot to unpack here. Let's have a conversation. And I want to be clear. I believe the best way to move society forward is evidence, but we have to interpret that evidence, because the evidence often is this is what works on average for a group of people. So if I'm to provide some research that says, here's what we know about Black women compared to Black men in terms of when they provide a message to a room that is predominantly white, that's on average. That's not the exact individual that's in front of us. So this is where the individual results vary. It is understated because I'm a firm believer, as opposed to saying here are evidence-based practices to be influential if you're the minority voice. These are scientifically informed strategies for you to take and then integrate with your own personal history and DNA and modify as you see fit. So that's the disclaimer. What we know is there was some really great research a couple of years ago in the Academy of Management Journal, just to show that it has some objective elements to this. And it talks about the amplification of voice. And there is something, Carla, to what you're saying, which is one of the things about principled rebellions, about dissent and defying dysfunctional ideas or unhealthy or even dangerous ideas, is when we are the witness to the person who has the idea, we are hearing it out and we're in the audience. It's an important part of one thing that we can do. If for those people that care about diversity and for those people that care about continuing the progress that's happening in society, is when someone who is marginalized. Now, let me give 3 different ways that can be defined. You don't have the numbers, you don't have the surface level characteristics or background that makes you one of the group, or you don't have the status or power. One thing that we can do is when we hear a message that resonates, we think it has legs, we think it could be tweaked and improved upon and can move society forward or a group forward. One thing you discover is that someone that does have power or status, and that might just be this, you're the Fonzie, you're the socially attractive one in the group. You're the one when you speak at a luncheon or a dinner, people put down their smartphones and they pay attention and they hang on your every word. Maybe it's because they curry favor. Maybe because they find you physically attractive. Maybe it's because you're actually really intelligent, the things you say. Those socially attractive people, and we have to just acknowledge they exist. One of their jobs, I want to give them the responsibility, is when you share an idea from someone else who does not have that privilege or power, and you physically face that person or name that person, either one of them, that person's idea increases in terms of the probability it will be heard, it will be listened to, and it will be considered. It's a simple behavior. And here's the extra benefit. If you're amplifying someone's voice by acknowledging not your idea, but the other person's idea, you're also get some of the attribution for all the positive benefits of that creative idea. So it's sort of a win-win-win situation. The amplifier is shown as you're pro-social, you're not selfish, you contribute to the value of the group. The marginalized person gains stature and power. You're in some ways has a contagion effect of social attractiveness. And the group becomes smarter than the sum of its parts because of those ideas are shared. And it's just an important principle is that it's not the only way if you end up being marginalized by gender, sex, race, sexual orientation, country of origin, political belief, whatever that form of diversity is. But this is a way that the audience can help, and it does increase the odds.
I really like the way that you framed all these different things in the book about the ability to talk persuasively, because I feel like a lot of times people might think that if you have to frame your message in a certain way, you're dumbing it down or you're appealing to the masses, and really you're just making the message more palatable, or you're making it yourself a more socially rewarding messenger.
No, thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, I'll give you an anecdote that just came to mind. I recently kind of invested into the history of what led gay marriage to be legalized. It's one of the historical landmarks to understand how can a marginalized group, which goes to combine your first two questions together. How does a marginalized group make an impact such that they are accepted and tolerated by the majority, dignified by the majority, and actually enter into the majority? History offers great lessons. No social change of the profound level of gay marriage has happened at the speed of a mere 10 years. And there's a few things that the real front gay activists did to kind of lead to gay liberation. And one of them was this: they had a great sense of humor. They were very careful about directing their messages one-on-one, face-to-face, eye-to-eye with people who they knew were in power. And they were very careful about the person that's going to give the message should be the person that answers the question that the audience wants to know. Are you really one of us? So for the humor part, there's some great video footage that you can find in documentaries where they're holding signs. This is in the 1970s, where you have people that are gay, lesbian, and bisexual that says, all we want is to get divorced just like you. What's the problem with that? And it's something that you don't see often in activism today. And I'm not saying everything has levity to it. It's a very serious issue. But you have to think strategically, being audience centric. What's going to win favor to get to the end goal? And sometimes it's serious, hard work in terms of legislation. And sometimes it's pointing out the foibles of the dominant social order's belief, which is if 50% of heterosexuals are getting divorced in terms of their marriages, you're not really on your high horse here to say, this is the unattainable mountain that we're going to focus on, that you're not allowed here because it's so sanctified and it's so beautiful and it's so perfect that it's so idyllic. And the other thing that they did, wait, can I just share a quick story from the gay liberation movement? Because this is the director's cut. This didn't make it into the book, and it really hurts me that it didn't. Which is so. Let me skip to the Pulp Fiction style to the punchline. So being gay has been considered a psychiatric disorder until 1987 in some variant. Just think about that. That's only 35 years ago. It's really important to understand norms, modifying dysfunctional norms are where the action is. Now, the evidence for that being a mental disorder started in the 1960s is a bunch of white men sitting in a conference room in a hotel, just like I'm sitting right now, and just said, you know what? This is kind of aberrant behavior. This is deviant behavior. What's the evidence? Well, I had this case. I talked to this guy and they were gay and they were unhappy with their work and their life. And so they're psychologically anguished. And that was basically the database that led to, okay, yeah, let's put that in there. Let's put that. It was listed as the #1 sexual disorder in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. So what gay activists decided was, we're not going to have everyone fully embrace us right off the bat. Here comes the strategy. Expand the time horizon. What's the thing that we can focus on concrete now? Get homosexuality out of this dictionary of psychiatric disorders. And the way they did it, this is the fast, speedy Cliff Note version. They couldn't get headway, was they were searching for, can we find a gay psychiatrist who's willing to speak at the annual convention of the American Psychological Association? And it took them years to find somebody, and then more years to find someone that was willing to speak. And then the only way that person was able to speak, a gay psychiatrist, was they wore pretty much a Michael Myers mask at a conference in a packed ballroom in a hotel with a voice synthesizer that altered their voice. And they wore this oversized tuxedo. Think of the Talking Heads, their MTV videos. And So they're sitting there, and these are the first words out of the mouth of this gay psychiatrist, introduced as Dr. H Anonymous, sitting in front of this room. Remember, this is before social media, before YouTube, before you've got video footage. I'm a psychiatrist. I'm homosexual. You could hear a pin drop. And at that moment, that conversation right then and there of those psychiatrists who like had this gasping, they're one of us. There's someone amongst us who's gay. And just because they had insider status and they sold it, they talked about just like the introduction to this Politics and Prose talk right now, they sold the credentials. The next year when they voted, they cited that talk, and it was decided that we need to remove homosexuality from the DSM. And there's a lot of strategies that we can deconstruct in there that social activists today can learn from the gay liberation movement.
There are okay. First of all, that I can't believe that story is not in the book, but that is amazing. Thank you. There's so many things I could go off on here. So one of the things I love that you brought up is the idea of the time horizon. And one of the most frustrating sentences that I think that was repeated throughout the book was "be patient, be patient, be patient." However, when you talked about the fact that homosexuality was in the DSM as a diagnosable disorder for so long until very recently, I can't believe that. Yale did not admit women until 1969, right? So it's like I think sometimes we can forget like how recent some of these changes are.
Yes,
We become completely impatient and want things now. And I love that story that you told just now because it really points to so many of the strategies that you talk about the importance of having a very deliberate, like mindful kind of intervention or very deliberate, mindful attempts instead of just kind of, putting whatever on social media and being angry.
Yeah. And I, Carla, I appreciate you pointing out the frustration of, I don't think I phrased it that way, but what's important is how it's interpreted is like, hey, listen, hang tight. Like, relax. It's coming. It's coming. It's coming. Like, it's not gonna happen right now.
As a white guy, it's like, right, especially. Sorry.
Yeah, and it is worth having the thought experiment of if I was a Black gay woman, would those sentences be interpreted differently? And these are,
would you even be saying those sentences?
Well, if you were a gay woman in 1972 and you were part of this movement of thousands of people, you would have said that sentence of exactly the group that I was describing, and look at what they accomplished to happen there. I'm not saying that's the only way, but actually from 60 years of research on minority influence, I mean, this is really a book about minority influence. Like, how can you alter the majority that's going in the wrong direction? Everything's a trade-off. We had this conversation earlier today is we have to ask ourselves, what are we willing to sacrifice knowing that all of our needs won't get met and us receiving dignified, tolerant treatment from the majority? And so, there was a study that was 1988 by Sergei Moscovici, who was experienced a tremendous amount of anti-Semitism in Europe in the 60s, who developed this idea, maybe the minority can be as influential as the majority, but the pathway is more constrained. You don't have as many options because if you have power, all I have to do is send a memo out, and for you to stay at my organization, you better listen to that memo, you better recite that memo, and you better act in accordance with that memo. You get compliance. You don't normally get compliance when you're the minority voice. What you do is, and this is why it takes time, you build a seed in people's heads, and then slowly you start to turn over. People start to think about it and maybe modify their behavior and maybe show good gestures and try their best. If you don't offer charity, if you don't offer the assumption of benevolence as people are trying, if you show negative evaluation and scorn to people who are trying to modify their language and behavior after years of being culturally programmed, you're going to lose traction towards the cause. And this is happening for a lot of social activism today is you're going after the greatest advocates you have, people that have ambiguous thoughts. They're not sure whether the effort is worth the squeeze, but they're trying their best, and you're not giving them the benefit of the doubt as they're making little missteps here. And it's worth having a conversation about, what's a misstep and what's a failure and what's something that deserves to actually be punished and persecuted. But it's worth asking the questions about quickly categorizing something in the simple false binary of you either did something good or you did something bad, as opposed to you are shaping and modifying behavior, and you are having to undo a lot of culture programming, which a lot of us has in terms of, most of us who are at least 30 years of age, our entire history of watching movies and televisions for 6 to 8 hours a day has been a bunch of people that look like me and you. And so to see the transformation is we're going to have a little bit of a what's the Sharon Brem's term, reactance formation, where we're going to have this defensive reaction of, whoa, this isn't what I'm used to seeing. This isn't part of my culture. This is a new culture. Yeah, the culture is changing. And for culture to change, the norms have to change. And for norms to have to change, people have to figure out, how do I modify every movement that I make? And if the surveillance is constant, people are going to be anxious and feeling threatened, and they're going to abort before you would like them to. They're not going to say anything. They're just not going to be part of the mission anymore. So the question is, how can we induce more charity and curiosity as opposed to more threat and surveillance?
Right. I like that idea of like charity and curiosity, as opposed to just assuming that people are going to be stuck with this zero-sum mindset forever, which I think is one of the defensive reactions that comes up a lot when people, they come out and they're pitchforks blazing. They don't think about the fact that, no, in order actually maybe to appeal to majority, or at least kind of like, get that crack in the universe, you kind of have to explain like, well, no, actually it's going to be good for everybody.
Yeah. There's a good concrete example of this right now. And I realize I'm going to enter the third rail from my New York City subway metaphor here, which is you could think about Biden about to make a Supreme Court pick, right? I have a very diverse class of students. George Mason University is, I think, the #1 most diverse school in the South. I don't know why we're considered the South, but good on us because we get a #1 ranking. And we discussed a counterfactual. What are the multiple different ways that Biden could have raised the idea that he wanted to diversify the pool in the Supreme Court? And I'm going to, and if there's students in my class who are in this call right now, feel free to kind of correct me if I mistakenly describe the norm of the class. The normative belief of our class was this: the more effective approach to make social change that is persistent and lasting and actually alters the culture, as opposed to a gesture that moves in the right direction but will create a needless backlash, is this. He just said he's going to look for the best candidates possible. He named the list, and every Black woman that he was considering was on that list. So he didn't list the fact that I'm looking for a Black woman. He just named the characters and put down their expertise, why they are amazing. Here are the number of cases that they did as a judge at the lower levels, at the district level, at the federal level, at the appellate level. Here are the tough cases that they did. Here was the one that got the most flack. Here's the non-defensive reaction they had. Here's their ability to handle big social media attention on cases that happen here. And on top of it, they happen to be a woman and they happen to be Black. This is the list. Instead, what he did from the start was say, I'm going to constrain the pool, and there's 3 things that the audience is thinking about a messenger. There's 3 different categories: bias, trustworthiness, expertise. And research partly done by my postdoc, Dr. Laura Wallace, partly done by Richard Petty at Ohio University of Ohio State. He basically showed these are independent. So trustworthiness, like basically, are you going to tell the truth? Bias, do you put your thumb on the scale? And expertise, do you have what it takes to reach the level that we're talking about here? Biden leaned on bias. He basically said, objectively, that was his message. The messaging focused on bias, and the message could have focused on trustworthiness and expertise. And I think it's just an example. Concrete examples allow us that we can deconstruct, allow us to do better in the future. If you want to have the utopian to society and move towards it, we have to use the strategies that are most effective. And the most effective strategies often aren't comfortable. Like, we would like to just be able to say, a lot of people would like to just say, we can just name exactly what we want to have and just do it. but the goal is to be effective, and the goal is for it to gain traction. And this is an example of an ineffective minority influence strategy.
So you said that the goal, you're saying that it was biased automatically. I guess I missed this announcement. Did he say that, or was it just, are you saying it was biased as a byproduct of having chosen women of color?
The nature of it's not necessarily what he did, it's how the communication was. And that's the message. The communication is that I'm only looking at a small piece of the pool, that's bias.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not saying it's discrimination. I'm going to ignore that radioactive description right now, but it is bias. And the only way for us to be effective as messengers, and I know that some people are going to disagree with this, that's okay, but I'm interested in, this is a book, and this is a framework about how to bridge the gap between the society we want and the society we have. And sometimes we have to do things that are suboptimal for our psychological well-being in the present moment. And this is an example of this. The bias is there is because you basically said Asian Americans, Native Americans, Hispanic Americans, Latina, white, you're not under consideration. It's only for, and so he's leaning on the bias, and there are 3 pillars. Why not lean on the other 2 pillars? We know from science, from evidence, that you're going to get more traction. You're going to have fewer people have second guessing the person you choose, and you have more people to kind of actually come to change the norms of, oh, I had no idea that this person exists who is Black, who's a woman, who is as intelligent and wise and smart than anyone that I've ever seen before, in terms of in the world of lawyers, in the world of judges, that happen there. That's what you want to happen.
Right. Okay. So speaking of Supreme Court justices, Ruth Bader Ginsburg once said, "When I'm sometimes asked when there will be enough women on the Supreme Court, and I say, when there are 9, people are shocked. But there have been 9 men, and nobody had ever raised a question about that." Okay, now on page 125, you write, "As traditionally underprivileged minorities gain power, they must take care to exercise restraint. Rather than simply hire, respect, or listen to people who look and think as they do, they should retain a healthy respect for difference and welcome in everybody, or welcome in everyone." So, devil's advocate, it sounds like you could say, it sounds like you're holding people who have been historically disenfranchised up to a higher or a different moral or ethical code than others who have been, say, abusing positions of power for centuries.
I'm so glad that we're going to have a constructive disagreement live for Politics and Prose. Mm-hmm. I have a suspicion that we actually don't disagree on this. I indict culture over human history. So
unpack that.
What's that?
Unpack that for us.
Yeah. So I mean, essentially, what's in this book? I mean, the book's not important. The book's just a bunch of frameworks. I mean, first of
all, just so everyone is clear, the book is important and it is wonderful, and I did devour it, and I am going to go back to it because look, there's just so much in here. I just want to put out, as though you're not already like here for the book, but seriously, the book is awesome. Even if we're off topic, I just want to say there's so many parts in here that I've marked, and I'm going to keep coming back to it. Just to interrupt, one of the things I loved in here is you have this little section about mental health and the importance of psychological flexibility and kind of like staying centered and like not letting your emotions get out of control. And I feel like that is something like whenever I think about, feminist principles or like things that I'm really passionate about, like I can feel myself getting angry. And I know in order to like stay in the game long term, I can't let that get the best of me. I have to stay mentally healthy. I have to stay kind of like, okay, I will pay attention to it just long enough to get angry so that I know that something needs to change. And then I will kind of recenter myself and get back to work. And then I will go and try to like do the things that I need to do to enact change. And I feel like being able to switch between those 2 things is important. And you actually discuss that. And so I just want to say that that's awesome. And thank you.
I totally appreciate the compliments. I want to go to where the criticisms are, because that's let's live the work. So Ruth Bader Ginsburg, let me just pull back for a second. She is the sex rebel. I mean, she's the one who fought for equality of salaries between men and women. And she fought for the equality of promotions and the equality of women be able to be involved in any industry, from the military, for business, for government, for everywhere. And then she became a Supreme Court justice later. Just as David Bowie's the gender rebel. Or here you've got a musician in the 70s and the 80s who kind of started to kind of blur the lines between why do we have to have non-permeable boundaries between the nature of gender for a male and a female. And he lived that, and he approached that, and he got a lot of friction and static, and you could read his autobiography and biographies about him. These are important characters. So Ruth Bader Ginsburg leans hard on that, and we needed Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I would actually argue is that her comment has some flaws in it in terms of where we're moving society-wise. What we know is this. From work particularly from Greg Walton at Stanford and David Yeager I think he's at the University of Tennessee, is when we have school systems where we have marginalized individuals, and let's just focus on race in particular right now, and you have teachers that treat Black students, teenagers, grade school kids different than white kids. They change the expectations where they make it easier for them because of a disadvantaged background. It backfires. And what you find is that teachers that show, he did a cool experiment where he had giving students back their papers. And in one condition, he just said just gave them their grade. And in the other condition, he basically said, I've seen you in class. I've seen you. I see you. I know what your potential is. You could do better than this. Didn't lower the standards, kept the high standards. Those kids performed exceptionally better on the next time that they gave a paper in. But more importantly than this, which I think is the cooler finding that's hidden in the scientific research, is those kids were more likely, given the option on their own for no credit, to redo the paper just to show that they could do better. They were more likely to do a second chance and a third chance of revising their essay. And if you think about what do we want the world to look like now and in the future, you want it to do where, following along the lines of, the Malcolm X's and the Martin Luther Kings and the Frederick Douglasses, is you want to create a culture where you respond the same way as if it's anonymized, those papers. You want, as a professor, as a teacher, and that you give the compassion, and you could put the effort expenditure into every one of the students, irrespective of race, gender, sex, their background, whatever it is, and you're just there for them. And you just tell those students, listen, stuff is going to come up, difficult things. When it comes up, you let me know. You don't have to give me details. I will give you as much of a runway as you need to make sure. I'll extend deadlines and things, but you still have to do the work. Why? Because when you leave here and you go into the workplace, there are things that do have deadlines, and there are things that have to be done. And if you work for the CIA or the FBI, there's going to be terrorist threats. You don't get to say that you had a disadvantaged background. Your job, and you're getting paid, is to protect the country. And if you're in the military on the front line, or a pilot in a plane, there are lives at stake. And so when I work with students, and some of the best teachers that Greg Walton was working with in these studies in California and Tennessee, the best teachers were the ones that kept those high standards, not because they were being discriminatory, the exact opposite, because they had so much compassion and they so much believed in their potential, and they were so focused on spotting their strengths and potential that they were willing to put the work in as long as they were willing to put the work in. And I think we have to be able to have these dialogues about what do we want society to look like, because at what point do you treat students as if they have strengths, they have great potential, and I'm going to treat you as such, and I'm not going to think you are lesser than because of the color of your skin or because of your background.
Right.
Sorry, that sounded like I was doing a political stump speech as opposed to us having a conversation. My apologies for the inflection.
No, not at all. No, that goes back to the point, we're talking about the George W. Bush quote about the soft bigotry of low expectations.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And I do, there's work by I think I interrupted myself. So in 88, Sergei Moscovici kind of did this research, and he basically studied Roman gypsies, and he asked the question of if the Roman gypsies who were persecuted, as if In a similar vein, it's a loose analogy of people who are non-white in the United States. If they presented themselves as victims, where they were asking for compensation for historical wrongdoings, would that lead to a better place in society than them presenting themselves as social advocates seeking tolerance, dignity, and to be integrated into society as just like everyone else? And what they found was that when the majority talked to gypsies who presented themselves as victims asking for compensation for past wrongdoings, the majority had their guilt alleviated as they gave them money, as they gave them a quota seats on college admissions, as they gave them a quota in the government. And then they felt morally licensed to show the same level of bias and discrimination towards them. But when those gypsies presented themselves as, we're not seeking, you did wrong. You had horrible atrocities for years. Treat us with dignity and respect, and don't discriminate against us when we're applying for those jobs and positions and those school opportunities. The guilt wasn't alleviated, and the majority felt, you know what, we should engage in reparation for the damages that we did in terms of fixing the systems, and our guilt is not alleviated by spending money to kind of wash our hands clean. And there's a real beauty of this research to think about, is the way that we present ourselves interfering with us getting the end game of what we want when we're talking about trying to improve society.
Interesting. Okay, so last question. Thank you for that. So for my book, of course, a little self-promotion, one of the reviewers on Amazon said that sadly there are no guidelines in the book about how to use numbers in an ethical way, right? There's no discussion about ethics or like how to make sure that we're presenting these things in an ethical manner. And I also thought about that for your book, interestingly enough. Like, how can we know that we're holding ourselves to an ethical standard, or how can we hold ourselves to an ethical standard when we're bucking the status quo and we're doing things? I don't know. Does that question make any sense to you?
Of course, it's a very, very important question. You know, just think about what's happening right now, right? You had the people saying that Biden stole an election. You've got a bunch of truckers in Ottawa who are saying we are willing to accept the trade-off that hospitals in Canada do not receive an adequate supply of blood to take care of kids who are basically trying to survive on their near deathbeds, people who have stage 4 cancer, people who are actually having amputations. But it's more important for us to, make sure that we fight the mask mandates. One of the things that I think about in terms of being constructive is to think of, as we mentioned this before, and I think it's a really important thread for everyone to be holding everywhere. Everything has a trade-off. And so one of the reasons, for example, that those truckers in Ottawa, I don't want to pick on them too much, but let's pick on them, is that they weren't successful at getting an alliance beyond the choir, was that they never discussed the trade-offs of like, okay, what resources aren't coming into Canada? Well, food. Okay, who's going to experience the greatest sacrifice? People that can't pay the extra dollar to have it, brought from Amazon Prime in terms of them delivering it from a drone to deliver it to their houses. So everyone who's disadvantaged economically, every low socioeconomic class person, everyone in rural provinces in Canada, these are the people that suffer. So is that an acceptable trade-off for fighting the mask mandate? That's a question. For them not to address that it exists, that makes them lose traction. And this is, one of the things that happen here. And when you have, protesters in the United States for whatever cost it is that happens there, whether it's the left, the right, or, somewhere in the middle, or you're fighting for, make sure there's no legacy admissions in colleges. There's no, why are we focusing so much? The highest paid person at University of Michigan is the college coach of the football team. So how does that talk about education? So if you're going to fight against these social norms, you have to ask about the trade-off. If you don't pay the college coach that money, well, what do we know about what's going to be lost in terms of the university structure? How much is the university dependent on how much the football team makes? Now, I don't know any of the answers. What I'm suggesting is we have to ask more questions. And the only dangerous question, in my belief, is that a question could be dangerous asked from a place of curiosity. But when you ask it from a place of obnoxiousness or gotcha, or you're asking a question that's not really a question, it's just a way to kind of demonstrate a fake level of responsiveness to the other side. This is when you're having non-constructive dialogue that happens there. And I think we have to allow people to ask questions. We have to ask, when it comes to anti-racism, to what degree is every organization that brings this in and every university, are they allowing questions? Because if you don't allow the questions, then all of the biases and all the difficulties that you hope go away, all they do is go beneath the surface, and the floorboards, they start to creak and crack and splinter, and you have no idea that the foundation that this organization, university is sitting on has all these problems because you didn't ask to hear what's actually happening, and you weren't receptive to those people that are disagreeing with you.
Right. It's like, as we were talking about before, so often, people think that the cultural pulse is on the New York Times and the New York Times articles and what the articles say. But actually, if you want to hear what people are really thinking, go to the comment section, right? Because even though it's not necessarily, in what the article is saying, like, those questions or the reactions that people are going to have to whatever is being put on display, like, those are always going to be there, whether or not the people who are in charge or the people who have the more visibility are actually addressing them.
Yeah, I always had this thought of for police officers when in terms of biases, and there's this is one of criminal justice reform is one of my big nonprofit causes when I'm not living my life as an author and a researcher.
We have to get to the questions in a second. So.
Oh yeah, I was going to say is that if we know that one of the biases is the subjective decision of a police officer to decide who they pull over, who they decide to actually even consider is going to have an entry point into the criminal justice system. There's a lot of subjectivity there, and we want to increase objectivity. And so in order to alter that bias, you need to have a forum where police officers can express those biases so you can re-educate them about where the problems lie. And if you don't provide a safe forum for them to express it, they still exist. You're just not going to hear about it. And that's not a healthy society. And that's, this is all about the messaging and also it's about being the receptive, curious, intellectually humble audience.
Thank you so much for that. Okay, so here we have some good questions here from the audience. Wonderful. Okay. Doctor, you prepared such an innovative volume on insubordination. Oh, this is from Harold Takushian. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. You prepared such an innovative volume on insubordination. Was it intentional that you did not cite Milgram, Ash, Kelman, Zimbardo?
Great question. Yes, it was intentional. One is all those studies have a tremendous number of flaws, and they've been exposed in scientific articles. And if you tag me on social media, I'm happy to post those articles. The second one is I wanted to fill the book with fresh stories because I want people to be engaged with the strategies and the content. I mean, there's something, Carla, you have a big journalist background and you've got your new column on Medium now. So you're more familiar with this. Is people come for the stories and they stay for the data. Yeah. So, the idea of, can I find the fresh stories of rebellions and rebels that you haven't heard of before? That was important to me because one thing that Carla and I really dislike about books is when people share the same stories over and over again. So everyone's talking about, when you think about dissent, you think about Ash and Milgram. Now, and, one of the coolest things about Ash is not his study. It's actually, there was a replication. It was done by Vernon, can't remember his last name, 1968. There was a replication and they had a guy. So if you're not familiar with the study, and a quick 5-second synopsis is, you're exposed to 3 lines and you're supposed to, and 3 lines are on one piece of paper, and there's another line on another piece of paper, and you're asked which line of these 3 is equal to this line.
That is Ash, isn't it?
Ash, yeah. And there's 3 Confederates next to you. They're actors, and they're basically going to pick a line that is not even close to the same in size to the other line. And you're supposed to kind of see, how do you react? Do you conform, or do you allow your senses to deceive your senses and tell the untruth. So what he did was Vernon had a bunch of people come in with big, thick eyeglasses, and they were given a script to say, I can't see that well, and I can't see that far, and I can't really see that image. And even having that person there that was conforming to the rest of the group did not dissuade the person, most people, from refusing to go with the group. Like, even though you knew that everyone next there, they just told you they can't see that well, and the task involves seeing which lines are similar in size. That alone, it just showed like the power of group dynamics to conform. It's so strong. It's really hard for us to break free from that. But a lot of this has kind of been told many times before.
But that reminded me of one of the stories you tell in the book that I love so much, about the underhanded free throw for basketball, and how, statistically that is so much more successful than just, free throws from overhand. However, how many great basketball players have not done that because they felt like they look silly?
Yeah, and they've used, more gendered language to describe why they refuse to do it. I mean, it's amazing how many things, effective tools and strategies exist in society that people won't use because they don't think they'll look cool and socially attractive doing them. And part of this book is not the heavy stuff I've been talking about. Part of this is just challenging silly norms. It's just asking questions of, in 2022, why do we have it where the majority of marriages that the woman's taking the guy's last name when both people have an ancestry that they're trying to honor? Why wouldn't it just, and we should be asking questions about, why is it that we have, baby showers that celebrate children, but we don't have a similar celebration for people that decide not to have children but go off on their own? Why do we choose one over the other one? Because there's so many routes that are available. Why is it assumed that everyone's supposed to have kids and get married when there's so many other routes for doing this? And why don't we celebrate these different pathways? So there's lots of places for rebellion when we start talking about social norms that deserve to be questioned.
I threw myself a party when I decided to adopt a dog instead of have kids. So there we go.
So I love that. That's the first time I've ever heard that in my entire lifetime. I think that's exactly what we should be doing.
Okay, so fun question. Do either of you have favorite dissenters, fictional, non-fictional, historical, contemporary?
Carla, you want to go first? Because I've been talking so much and you have that amazing book as well.
No. Do I have a favorite dissenter? You know what? Can I tell you something? My great-grandmother got divorced from my great-grandfather because he cheated on her. And then she went on to become the vice president of her company in Buffalo in the, I don't know, what was it, 30s, 40s? Such a long time ago. But she used to take herself on shopping trips. She used to fly down to New York City for the weekend and go on shopping trips. And she was such a badass, just single mom, but single professional, doing her thing. And so I just admire that woman so much. And I am very proud to come from that lineage. So I've not been thinking about dissenters clearly for quite some time, but that was just the first thing that popped into my mind. But I feel like that really speaks to the power of role models and examples, and being able to, look at people who look like us, or being able to see somebody who we can identify with, and being able to forge our own path and kind of know that there's a sense of psychological safety in that. And I feel like that is really, that's something that we don't necessarily talk about. I mean, maybe, I don't know, maybe other people do, but I feel like personally, it's just always really reassuring when I can identify with somebody or kind of have that there.
It's so empowering. I wonder, so we talked earlier about people falsifying their beliefs in public, but in private they express what they truly think. Mm-hmm. I wonder how many women your great-grandmother inspired, but on the surface said, "Oh my God, can you believe what she's doing?" That's because it was like an anathema to divorce your husband back then, much less a woman to be, running a major organization that happens there. But behind the surface, I wonder how many women that she inspired that she doesn't know. I'm sure it's
planted the seed. Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Obviously I've been doing this for 6 years, been studying this. So I have a number of them. I'm going to name one just because I have Carla here. And I think Carla is the great descendant of this particular hero of mine. And also I lived next to him in college, and I got to invite him to dinner, and he denied me an opportunity 6 times. I asked him out for dinner and he said no all 6 times. So to me, the first scientist to realize that maybe producing academic work written in the fifth person that nobody reads, that's archived on bookshelves, is not the way to go, but actually talk to the public and inspire them to realize that there's so much more beauty in science than any Greek mythology that you can come up with, or any, beautiful art that you can find in museums. It's equal at level. Carl Sagan was the reason that you have, the Brene Browns and the Adam Grants and, everyone that's kind of educating people today about here are some of the best practices, and we have some evidence behind them. Starts with Carl Sagan with Cosmos. And, if he read Carla Starr's book of Making Numbers Count, could you just show it one more time? Because I feel like we're not giving this due justice. Her whole book is about what we do not do a good enough job of persuading as scientists, and you don't see psychologists when there's a school shooting. You don't see on a panel on CNN. You don't see school psychologists on TV when there's an opium epidemic or a high level of loneliness, because we talk in statistics, and we talk in ways that aren't persuasive, and we talk in ways that are too arcane. And Carla's entire book is about, we need to communicate numbers in ways that people understand. Can I give my favorite example from your book just to illustrate this? And this is a direct descendant of Carl Sagan. So when they had that ship that blocked the Suez Canal in 2020, and everybody was in the media talking about, this is in her book. Sorry to steal the great juice out of it. And everybody in the media was like, I don't understand. How could one ship stop so much traffic from so many distributors around the world? And it's because they were imagining a ship that they've been on. They were imagining their friend's ship where they just go fishing on the weekend. And so what Carla did was take the metric length of the ship and then converted it into the metaphor as it would be, that ship's size was as if you turned the Empire State Building on its side, took off the antenna, and then blocked. That's what was laying there between the Suez Canal. And all of a sudden, immediately, your brain goes like, oh, that's a big ass freaking ship. I wasn't thinking like ships could be that big. And that's the type of way that you convey messages so that immediately everyone understands, oh, you meant a ship. Oh, now I got what you mean.
Right. It just goes to show what you were saying before. We come for the story, stay for the data.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And this final question, right? We have 1 minute left, apparently. Okay. This is from Barbara Clark. We have more questions, but I guess.
Barb. So good you're here.
Good old Barb. I know. Where has she been our whole lives? I don't know. We haven't seen her in a while. Finally. Okay. What advice do you have for teaching teenagers the beauty of insubordination? You know why I love this question so much is because I feel like obviously need to belong, right? Mark Snyder's paper, but it's just like a fundamental human need, but it is so salient when we are teenagers to belong and to fit in. And so I feel like, however, that's also when we're finding our identity. So I feel like, the teenage years are an especially fraught time for to learn these lessons, but it also seems like we would be like less receptive to them.
Yeah, it's a great question. So, and Barb's a good friend of mine. I'm going to see her at the Tool concert in a couple of days in DC. So let me just say that I think there's two really important things that I would want to convey. One is we have to deconstruct as adults our moments of cowardice and bravery, not just for ourselves as the parents, caregivers, or adult people, mentors in kids' lives. We also have to do it for other people when we tell stories about what's happening in the news. And so, for example, right now I'm at this hotel because I'm at my 15-year-old daughter's soccer tournament. And one thing I do is I try to negotiate deals everywhere. So when we got to the hotel, I asked for an upgrade. And I say, is there like a discount you can give? I'm a teacher, I'm a professor, and then teachers don't get enough money, they don't get paid enough money, and you get them to laugh a little bit. Like, what about the good guy discount? The thing is, like, I had a neighbor that had a There's a snowstorm and I shoveled the snow and I didn't ask for money. I was hoping that something like this, like there maybe the karmic moment would be a moment like this. So after it happened, these kind of situations, and you get the upgrade or not, you just deconstruct it for your kids of, it doesn't hurt to ask as long as you do it with the spirit of humanity, of respect and compassion or playfulness or kindness that happens there. And then there's the moments where, you're at these soccer tournaments, sticking with this weekend, where someone's really rude to these refs. These referees are 15 years old, and you've got grown men who are, big muscular men that are yelling and screaming. And I'm usually the guy on the sideline who just very quietly walks over. It's like, hey, guy, like, listen, yell at like the friend next to you, yell at your coach. But listen, that's a 15-year-old kid. Do you remember what it's like to be 15? And then normally they'll curse at me or kind of yell at me, but they're not going to hit me. But your heart beats. And you say to yourself, why do I have to be the one that does it? Like, why do I have to be the one that protects this ref? But if everybody says that, then nobody protects the 15-year-old who's about to have a panic attack on the field. And I really think that we have to train our kids to be, I'm taking Philip Zimbardo's term, heroes in waiting, where you're waiting for moments to show these psychological strengths you have in arsenal. And it's almost like the lifeguard. The lifeguard is trained and gets paid all this money for just that one moment over the course of a 3-month summer where a kid almost drowns. Like, they just fall under for a few seconds. All of that time, all of that boredom sitting on that lifeguard seat is for that one chance. So don't waste it when that kid falls in the water, because that's your moment to be a hero. Like, look for it. Don't think of yourself as like you're looking for action. You're looking for the moment to be the hero. And when you're walking around the world, we want to train our kids of, people are going to be bullied. People are going to be mistreated. People are going to be disrespectful. And you can be empowered to at least say something, even if you're scared. And again, if you're not scared, you're not brave. And I think we have to treat them with the respect that they can hear our stories and we can show them when we're scared and that we did something anyway.
Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, I hate to cut everything short. We could easily sit here for another hour with all of these great questions, which we've taken note of. Everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. Again, we'll put the link to get a signed copy. We still have some at Politics and Prose of The Art of Insubordination, How to Dissent and Defy Effectively by Todd Kashdan. Thanks to the author and to Carla Starr for being with us this afternoon. This has been such an insightful and engaging conversation. We hope for many more of them to come, as little dissenters are now going to go be insubordinate where and will they choose. We could go on, but unfortunately we'll have to end there. All of you out there watching, thanks to you. Visit us at politics-prose.com, and from our shelves to yours, we hope you're out there staying safe, staying strong, and of course, staying well read. And we will see you next time. Thanks to both of you so much.
Thanks for coming, everyone. I know it's a Saturday at 3:00, and Jean-Paul, this is my personality all the time. Be thankful you're not married to me.